political drama. It's not just for the real world anymore. Greetings and welcome back to another fun and exciting episode of the Vodkast Does Dungeons & Dragons. I'm your host, as always, Geycen Oliveira, DMJ. Today, I want to talk about a few things. Things that can affect your games in ways that perhaps you never thought they were capable of changing before. Let's take a look at real-world things. I've told you to look at movies before. I've told you to look at comics before because I think it's a great reference for your game. There are a lot of storylines and a lot of elements within movies and comic books that you can take and kind of put into your games. But have you ever thought of taking the real world and putting it in your game? Now, let me preface this with talking about real-world politics. Yes, I have an opinion on real-world politics, and I don't want to share them with you because I don't want to lose you. I want you to enjoy what you're here for, and that's to learn about some different ways and different things you can do in your D&D games to spice them up a little bit. So mind you, I'm not targeting anyone here. I'm just using real-world reference, okay? Now, I'm not just talking about real-world reference in terms of right now. I'm talking over the last 10 years. The United States political climate has been changing over and over again, and things have leaned one way, they've leaned one other way. But through it all, especially over these last 10 years or so, we've learned something, that politics can be used in your games to cause incredible drama. Now, I often don't like to go to politics in my games. It just seems boring to me, but I did play in a game once where there was a huge election about to take place, and one of the candidates was clearly a tyrant, a criminal, and we needed to find a way to prove that to the people. So there, in and of itself, became an adventure and a mystery, infiltration, espionage, all kinds of things that happen, yes, in our real-world government climate right now. Things are happening, and they can happen in your game as well. Imagine a scenario in which this is happening in your game. You've got a candidate that's for the people, and you've got a candidate that's for themselves. How do you align yourself? Do you choose to align yourself with the one who's willing to maybe give you power if you're willing to help him? There's a lot of little elements that you can intercede there before the election actually occurs. Assassination attempts, that too. And a bunch of other things like that could really kind of get things interesting and intriguing, keep your players on edge too, keep things tense, never knowing what's going to happen. Perhaps one of these candidates represents an organization that isn't so accepted in modern culture in your D&D world. Or perhaps one of the candidates is running on a platform that you know he isn't really behind or something like that. There's a lot of little niches and little nooks and crannies that you can kind of dig into and pull out what you want out of that. And it doesn't even have to be that intense. You can bring it down. I mean, the way things are, at least here in the United States right now, it's pretty crazy, and it just seems to keep getting crazier and crazier. Perhaps you could use that element of insanity and chaos. Perhaps it's a god of chaos that's influencing this one person who wants absolute madness to take over the countryside. They want to be able to move their troops in and not have to worry about anything because everyone else is already in conflict. Does that sound familiar? Perhaps one of your players wants to play a politician or gets involved in some kind of politics. That could be an interesting twist on things, too. I've never had a player that's been interested in actually becoming part of that political climate, that story. But it could be interesting. It's not something I've ever done before. However, I'm just giving you ideas. There's just, it's vast, the amount of stuff. Perhaps one of the candidates owns a ton of land and he wants to build something on it. Perhaps he's already elected. Even if it's not an election, there are things that you can use in that political climate to, cause drama. Maybe you have to get a candidate out of office because of what they're doing. And the direct route, of course, would be to lay siege to them, but their keep is surrounded by armies. There's no way to get to them, and their iron fist rules over the land. There's nothing anyone can do about it. There's all kinds of little intriguing things that come along with adding politics into D&D. If there are two things in the world you can count on to not count on, it's politics and weather. And I think weather is a great element that you can add to your game in any combat situation. It doesn't even have to be a combat situation. Perhaps an evil wizard has found a way to blot out the sun, and now it just snows constantly, or you're in complete darkness, allowing, drow to come up from the Underdark and live on the surface for once. That's actually something I used in the game, and I thought it was a great idea. Another scenario, I know I've told you guys about it before, but it's one of the most the most dramatic moment I've ever had in any of my games is the party had gone into this location in northeastern Athalia, which is called Shamar. It is bordered by a magical wall. There's a desert on one side and an absolute frozen tundra on the other side. And the only way to get through is through these tunnels in the mountains. They made their way through treacherous environments and horrible enemies that they had to fight. And eventually they got to this just open plain of snow and ice and a barren wasteland. And the only way to get to their goal was to climb this mountain, which was already difficult. It wasn't something they were completely prepared for. And when they got about halfway up, there was an earthquake. And what happened was the whole side of the mountain came down with the party, splitting them in two. And for a few weeks, I was able to run the game separately until they finally got back together again. However, when they did finally see each other again, it was such a dramatic moment in my game that it brought tears to my players' faces. And I've never seen, or their eyes, wherever tears come from. And I'd never had that happen to me in a game before. It was the very first time I'd invoked so much emotion in the middle of a game that I think we had to pause for a moment before we could move on. But when the party was back together again, it inspired them and it really rejuvenated them as a party. They started working together again to face this great evil that they were intending to get to in Shamar. Anywho, those are some great ideas. Rain, snow, wind, all these things can affect your game, and especially in combat. Obviously, it doesn't have to be in combat, like I was saying before, but if you have a combat in a desert, perhaps in the ruins of some old pyramid, and you can add depth and layers to your combat, as well as a windstorm coming through and affecting everything that's happening during that fight, all these things add up and can make for an amazing combat session. I love using these things in my game, politics, weather, environment, to make it more realistic for the players, more fun for the players. It's not just walking through, an empty hallway and coming across goblins and fight with them. There's other elements to combat that you can add in that aren't directly related to the combat itself. And I think weather is a great aspect of that. I think terrain is a great aspect of that. I think the environment is a great way to bring it in and just really kind of change the dynamics of your combat, because sometimes they get lame and you sit there for an hour at times just going through combat. I remember one session we sat 3 hours through a combat session, and it was interesting and it was dramatic, and of course there were the elements that I added into it that spiced it up a little bit. But when I forget to do that and I end up running a basic combat, it's just no fun for me or the players. So that's my advice for you guys this week. I don't have a ton I wanted to talk about. We got some great stuff coming up for the Vodkast Does D&D in the future. My friend Jim and Artie and I are going to be doing a little bit more. You're going to see us a little bit more on here. We're going to be doing some podcast stuff, video podcast stuff, hence the Vodkast. And hopefully you guys will dig that. And if you guys want me to cover anything, or if there's anything you want me to talk about, or questions you may have as a new DM or DM for years, please let me know in the comments below. I'm really here just to help you guys out, give you guys some ideas. I love channels like this. I love when I can watch somebody and it gives me an idea for my game that I never had before. So I hope I've done that for you today. And if I haven't, I apologize. And I hope you come back and check out next week's episode. Every Wednesday, we'll have the Vodkast Does D&D episodes. Mondays and Fridays turn out to be food reviews or whatever I feel like doing. But if you're digging the content I'm making, as much as I love making the content that you guys are watching, would you please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, and hitting that little bell icon, because it'll let you know every time I put out a new video. Don't forget to make somebody smile today and make yourself a better person tomorrow than you were today tomorrow. Let's make the world spin a little bit happier and a little bit geekier. All together as one, my brothers, singing and dancing in that sun and the rain. Live life to the fullest and love every moment of it, because you just never know when that last moment's going to come for you. However, never live in fear of that moment. Always live in love. Never let your inner child die. Take care of yourselves. Take care of one another, and take care of those around you who cannot take care of themselves, for they are the ones that need it the most. And if no one has told you today that they love you, the Vodcast loves you very much just the way you are. All right, guys, do no harm. I'm Geycen Oliveira. This is the Vodcast, and I'll catch you guys a little bit further on down the road to 50. Take care, my friends, and happy adventuring.
Don't go to sleep with a catch it in your pocket.